Dear students, welcome to this video. Now in this video, we are going to discuss a very specific theoretical model. Now the good part is this model has a fancy name. Why? Because this is called ADDIE model. Again, the ADDIE model. So this specific model is often used in designing and implementing a training program for the employees. Now, before I start going into the details of this model, I just want to tell you that I will explain this model thoroughly and with detailed examples. I know whenever you hear a theoretical model or a theory in general, you get a little bit scared. Do not worry, I'm going to make it as easy as possible with detailed examples and explanations. So without further delay, let's start with the details of this model. So what does this model mean? So here it goes. So ADDIE is a framework that many training developers use to develop trainings or courses. So this is just basically a framework for developing training programs. Now in the next slide, I have a detailed picture or illustration which shows each and every single step in this model, but in a summary format. Don't worry, after that illustration, I'm going to explain each of the steps of an ADDIE model in detail. So here is the summary of the ADDIE model. As you can see, we have the explanation of each of the steps in an ADDIE model here. So what does ADDIE stand for? The A in ADDIE stands for analysis, D stands for design, the next D stands for develop, and then I stands for implement, and finally E stands for evaluate. Now along with all these words, I'm sure all of you can see that there is a summary of all of these steps written here. Now I'm not going to read out any of these summary here. Why? Because rather than providing you this summary, I'm going to explain each of these steps in very much detail very soon. So in that case, I'm sure it doesn't make any sense just reading out those summaries. However, if you want, you can take a look at them at your own time. So without further delay, let's take a look at the detailed explanation of the analysis phase. So what happens in the analysis phase? Now in this very first step, as the name suggests, we basically analyze things. Again, as the name suggests, we do analysis. Now what sort of analysis? Here it goes. In this phase, the HR manager analyzes number 1, whether training is needed, and number 2, why training is needed. Again, mainly two things. We analyze whether training is needed and why training is needed. Let me give you an example and then all of these will be crystal clear to you. Let's continue with our earlier example of the professional racer here. So let's say you are the HR manager of a professional racing company. Now let's assume that you have a bunch of new employees hired for the organization. So now, as you can see from this picture, that we have hired 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 new young employees or racers in our organization. All of them are really young, right? So you have hired them and now you are thinking that whether you need to train them at all. So you are going to analyze whether these 9 racers need any kind of training, and if they need any training, in that case, why do they need that training? Now do not worry if the concept is not clear to you yet. I'm going to explain it in much detail with 2 further points. Let's move on. So in the analysis phase, we basically do 2 things. Number 1, we do task analysis. What is task analysis? Here it is. So here we analyze the job to find out the employee skills required. So in this phase, we analyze the job and then we try to find out what are the skills required to perform that job. So in the case of a professional racer, obviously the most basic skill required is to know how to drive, and along with that, we also may require the skill of time management. The racer must be able to handle time pressure, right? Because it's a race. Time is always running out. So these are maybe the 2 skills required for the job. So through task analysis, we try to find out what are the skills required for that job. Why? Because once we identify these skills, then we can say that yes, we need to design training to develop these kinds of skills among our employees. So that's what task analysis is for. So yes, One of the analysis that we do in this phase is task analysis. What is the other task? Let's take a look. So the other one is performance analysis. What do we do here? We analyze the performance. Let's go through this para together, and then I'm going to explain it with another example again. So here we verify that there is a performance deficiency or gap and determine whether that deficiency should be corrected through training or through some other means, such as transferring the employee or increasing salary. So again, what do we do here? We find out whether there is any performance gap, and then we try to analyze that whether that performance can be corrected using a training or maybe some other means, such as salary increase or something else. Let me explain this with an example here. Let's go back to our young racers again. Now, we hired these racers, right? Now, let's assume that we poached all these racers from another company. So basically, all of these racers used to race for another company, and then we have basically poached them or taken them away from that company to our company. So they are already experienced and professional racers. It's just that they used to work for another company. So we can easily say that yes, all of them are very skilled and they know how to race in a competition very well. Now the problem is, after I hire all of them, I find out that they are not doing so well in my company. I mean, that's really surprising, right? They were so good in another company. I mean, they used to win races all the time when they were working for the other company. But when I hired them and they started working for my company, none of them are doing good. Now, what is the problem here? There is a performance gap. But what is the reason for that performance gap? Or what is the reason for that poor performance? Now, as I said earlier, all of them are really skilled already. So I don't think the performance gap reason is their poor skill level. Rather, the reason can be something else. Now, after doing analysis of performance, the reason can be one of these two. Number one, the coach in my company is really rude. He does not know how to behave to the racers very well. So he is always shouting, always scolding, right? So the racers are not happy with the coach. And that is why they have a poor performance. On the other hand, the another reason can be money. So they're not happy with the payment that they are getting. So maybe they want even higher payment. So now do you understand? There is a performance gap in my racers, but the reason is something else. It is not the lack of skill, rather it can be the rude behavior of the coach or the poor salary level. Now the point that I'm trying to make here is that whenever there is a performance gap or poor performance, training is not always the solution, alright? I mean, if they need more money, training them on driving skills will not improve their performance. That's very normal. So training is not always the solution. So in the analysis phase, that's what we try to find out. Whether training is needed at all or do we need to do something else. And this is a very common mistake done by many organizations. I mean, many trainers fall into this trap. So what happens here? The biggest trap that trainers fall into is developing training for problems that training just will not fix. So again, blindly believing that training will always improve my performance is not a wise thing to do. We need to find out the true problem and then decide whether training is needed at all. And that is a very important task in the analysis phase. Alright, so we are done with the analysis phase. Now let's move on to the next phase, which is design phase. Now again, if you can think of it as a planning phase, as it is written here. Now this is very simple. As the name suggests, we are going to do some planning here. So after the analysis phase, if we think that we need training, then we move on to this phase. So what happens here? Let's take a look. In this stage, we plan everything. This is the most important keyword. We plan everything. So design means planning the overall training program, including training objectives and delivery methods. Again, please be careful that in this phase, we just plan everything. So we just write down everything on pen and paper. So maybe we do brainstorming on pen and paper and then write down everything, all the training methods on pen and paper, and then write down the pros and cons also on pen and paper. So simply speaking, everything in this phase is in the planning format. And most of it happens on pen and paper. So I'll give you an example very soon. But before that, let's take a look at the things that we plan in this phase. So what are some of the steps in this phase? Number one, we set or plan on the performance objectives. So we set objectives here. Next, we plan or create a detailed training outline. So all training program steps from start to finish. So we plan all of that. So again, both of these steps happen on pen and paper here. What happens next? Here it goes. Planning or choosing a program delivery method. So we decide whether we are going to use lecture method, if lecture, whether it's going to be face-to-face or online. So again, we are going to plan on that. And finally, once all the planning is done, we then verify the overall program design with management. So once all the planning is concrete and it is ready, we go to our boss and ask them to approve our plan or the training design. So again, all of it happens on pen and paper. Why? Because this is sort of the planning phase where we plan the ultimate design of the training. Alright, now let's move on to the example. And after that, the concept will be even clear to you. So what happens in the design phase of the training for racers? Let's take a look. Now let's assume after task analysis and performance analysis in the earlier phase, you have decided that yes, for your 9 racers, you are going to design some sort of a training. So you are going to plan some sort of a training here on pen and paper. Now for that, you went into a meeting room and you sat with all of your team members. Now after a lot of brainstorming and discussion with your members, you have decided that yes, you are going to give them 2 types of training. So you are going to combine 2 types of training for them. One of them is this one. I'm sure many of you remember this training method. Can you recall? Yes, this is vestibule training. If you have forgotten, I would request you to go back to the earlier videos and take a look at this method. So again, let's assume that this is one of the training methods that you have planned to design for the new racers. And along with that, you have also decided that yes, you are going to give them this training as well. What is this method? Yes, this is simulation method. So again, after all the discussion, you have decided that yes, you are going to give them vestibule training and simulation training. Now all of this planning happened on pen and paper. Now on pen and paper, you are writing everything down. So what is going to happen in the training? When is it going to take place? Then how many participants are going to participate? Who is going to conduct the training? Everything. So maybe you are preparing a brief report for your boss. So once the planning is concrete and it is ready, you take the report to your boss for approval. So what happens next? You take your plan to your boss, and if your boss likes it, then they approve the plan or the design of the training. Now after the design phase, we move on to the development phase. So once your plan gets approved, you move on to this phase. So what happens in the development phase? This is what happens. Program development means actually assembling or making the program's training content and materials. So here, once we get the approval, then we start arranging everything. Why? So that we can actually start the training very soon. So what do we do here? Here the actual training materials such as manuals, lectures, demonstrations, handouts, everything are being prepared. So as I said just earlier, you are basically preparing your materials or sort of arranging your materials. Let me give you an example. In that way, it will be very easy to do. So let's continue with your racing example. So let's assume that your boss has approved the vestibule training and the simulation training combination. Now after that, what are you going to do in the development phase? Number one, obviously you are going to arrange this car, right? So maybe we have to buy this car. And also we have to find out a driving space like this. So maybe a parking lot or a driving course. So we need to find out a place like this. So what are we doing here? we are basically arranging all the training materials and all the training places so that the training can be started when the time comes. So you are arranging this tool. What next? So maybe for simulation, you have to buy this whole arrangement. So you need to buy this screen and this whole setup and then make this usable for the trainees. So again, we are arranging everything here. Now, it's not about only arranging these. We also have to prepare all the training materials. So what are the instructions going to be? What are the handouts going to be for the trainees? Where is the training room going to be if there is any classroom session and everything? In this phase, we also have to talk to the instructors. So talk to them and then make sure that they are available on the training day and then fix their salary and everything. So in summary, in the development phase, we are arranging every single item for the training. So yes, at the end of the development phase, all the materials are ready. So we can start the training now, right? So that's when we move on to the next stage, which is implementation phase. So in this phase, we actually start the training program. So the trainees now actually can start learning through the training program. So what happens here? Here, the training program is run in real life. So again, in this stage, the employees are being trained through the training program. So as you can see, in this phase, we basically implement the training or run the training program. So all the participants are basically learning through the training program here. So if we go back to our example, after the development phase, when we start the implementation phase, what will happen? Number one, the racers will start driving their car. So they are going to start learning how to drive, maybe through vestibule training. And also the participants will start going through simulation training, right? So as you can see here, this guy is going through a simulation training. So as you can see in both of these pictures, the training program is actually being run. So this is what happens in an implementation program. Now, once the training program is over, what happens next? Are we done? No, we are not done yet. We are left with the very last stage. So what is the last stage? Here it is, evaluation phase. So we are going to find out that yes, once the training is over, was it successful? So we are going to evaluate the training program. So what happens here? The training program is evaluated to see whether it has actually helped the organization achieve its improvement objectives. So in very simple terms, was the training effective and successful? So in the case of our race training example, how can we evaluate? Number one, we can take a test of the trainees to check whether they actually learned the skills. Now the test can be in a written format, or maybe we can ask them to get into a car and show us whether they are able to drive smoothly. So here we are evaluating their learning through the training program. Now another kind of evaluation can be through a survey. So a post-training survey. What happens here? After the training program, the trainees or the employees are asked to fill out a survey about the effectiveness of the training program. So in this survey, feedback is taken from the employees or the trainees. So maybe we ask them whether they liked the training, whether they actually learned something from the training, whether they liked the instructor, and questions like that. So as you can guess, this is completely similar to your teacher's evaluation program, right? So as you can provide feedback there, in the post-training survey, trainees can provide feedback regarding the training. So this is the very last stage of the ADDIE model. Now just to mention here, in the very next video, I'm going to explain in further detail what happens in an evaluation phase. How can we evaluate a training program even better? What are the things exactly that we can evaluate for a training? For now, this much is enough. So yes, congratulations. We are done with all the 5 steps of the ADDIE model. So we are done with this video. I'm going to see you very soon in the next video.